Recording now.
Only 32% of Americans say that they are proud of the election that saw Donald Trump selected as the next president of the United States. Now, you might say, well, that's because things are so polarized, and there's always only about a third of Americans who are proud of the election results. Well, that's not true, because in 2008, 67% of Americans were proud that President Obama had been elected president of the United States. And this really goes to what I've been talking about the embarrassment on the world stage that the election of Donald Trump is already and is going to be. Gallup had a very interesting poll that they've been doing for a while, reacting to Donald Trump's election. And I'll put up some of the highlights for you to look at and tell you about them. In 2016, 80% of Trump supporters are excited about the results. In 2008, 59% of all respondents were excited, and that represents a pretty significant difference, where the excitement right now is very heavily concentrated among Donald Trump supporters only. Now, in terms of fear, 76% of Clinton supporters say they are afraid of the election results. In 2008, 27% of all respondents were afraid. And that sort of makes sense because the fear of an Obama presidency was really more concentrated among the fringe. It was very much based on President Obama's identity, whereas the fear of the Trump presidency is much more related to policy and what it is that Trump has actually promised to do during the campaign. And as I mentioned, the most interesting maybe piece of this survey is that 32% of all respondents say that they are proud of the election of Donald Trump. Less than half of the number, 67%, that in 2008 said they were proud of the election of President Barack Obama. The proud one is really very telling. And the math checks out because think about it. 27% of eligible voters voted for Donald Trump. They're presumably mostly proud, I would guess. I mean, they did vote for the guy, plus some of the people that didn't vote at all. The numbers would probably be very similar if Hillary Clinton had won the election. The type of difference in the proud and fear thing that I'm thinking about is, what are we proud of and what would we be afraid of? Hillary Clinton, Pat, is a status quo, plutocratic, centrist Democrat beholden to the oligarchs, and there would be some fear about that. But Donald Trump is a narcissistic sociopath who's interested in being president for the idea of it and the power that it brings, but not actually to do the job. Not all fear is created equal, although my thought is, if Hillary Clinton had won and you had asked people who's proud, who's afraid, the numbers may not necessarily have been drastically different.
Well, I think the stark difference often has to do with the fact that we elected the first black president in 2008.
Yeah.
And we may have seen numbers similar to that because we had the first election of a woman president. But given her unfavorables, they probably wouldn't have been so high as it was for Obama.
Donald Trump does have to appear in court for fraud. We will talk about the details of what he is trying to do with regard to that a little bit later on in the show. You have an individual here who has made a lot of money screwing contractors and investors to the point where at one point major banks would not loan him money. The campaign has been in contact with the Russian government while that same government hacked Democratic email servers. He has very few policy positions of his own. The ones he does have, if God forbid they actually come to fruition, would likely be disastrous economically. So I think that the word fear, we talk about fear and fear mongering a lot, but the fears that existed among a Clinton in relation to a potential Clinton presidency are very different than the fears that we are talking about with a Donald Trump presidency. The polls certainly reflect that this was an election that saw an unusual electorate, varied motivations for why people were voting either for or against. And I am genuinely curious, and this is not a rhetorical question, this is not me implying anything, I'm genuinely curious to see, as the Donald Trump presidency starts and continues, what kind of approval ratings is Donald Trump going to have?